Welcome to our video series, What CEOs Learn from Board Roles. We're delighted to have with us today Richard Tyson, who is the Chief Exec of TT Electronics, a global provider of engineered electronics for performance critical applications, and also sits as a non-exec on the board of Vitec Group, a provider of image capture and content creation solutions. Richard, welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, great to be here this morning.
Thank you. So Richard, you joined and were appointed to the board of Vitec when you've been CEO of TT Electronics for about 4 years. How do you feel that this particular non-exec role has benefited your day job as chief executive of TT?
I think for me, it was all about bringing in experiences to the TT group and board that were different from the ones that we were and I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and hopefully give me some perspective of how my NEDs felt being on the TT board with me. And I think it's fair to say it's done exactly that and more, I would say, Alex.
Excellent. And we're cognizant that you'd sat on a subsidiary board at Cobham previously, where you sat in your former exec role. What surprised you about the non-exec position with Vitec, given some of your experience of sitting on a subsidiary board?
But I suppose the thing that was probably most surprised about is that being a NED as well as practicing CEO, really the shared experiences that you were going through every day meant that you were able to sort of, I felt I was able to bring them real time to the Vitec board, and frankly, hopefully Stephen, the CEO, would say the same. But equally, as I mentioned before, it was great to be able to sort of be in that other role in the room and bring that back to the way I was presenting stuff to the TT board and talking about things to the TT board, about what needed to be done, decisions that needed to be taken, because you could have both reflections on the experience when you were going through big decisions, I guess, in the boardroom.
You've led TT through the onset of COVID, and as the pandemic has cycled through. Do you think the operational distance that you have as a non-exec director gave you additional insight into helping lead your teams at TT?
So I think it definitely did. I guess I would point to a couple of things. We at TT learned a lot from our Chinese experience early in the pandemic, both from a supply chain risk and running businesses out there in China. But Vitec also had significant supply chain in China, and obviously, business to consumer effectively activity in terms of retail outlets. So we were going through, in different parts of our business, very similar immediate crisis type impacts. So Vitec was seeing things that were happening that could reinforce the confidence and decisions we were making at TT, and I think vice versa. And then Vitec also ended up, essentially quite early in the pandemic, being in the eye of the storm in Italy. So when you add those two things together, I felt like between both businesses, we were helping each other in the very early learning crisis phase of the pandemic before the UK even knew what was coming.
So you could be in the vanguard about making decisions and making the right judgment call.
I believe definitely, and it made the businesses from a global perspective way more prepared to deal with it.
Excellent. And sort of moving that slightly further on as we've gone through the pandemic, has remote working made it harder or easier to fulfill both roles? And what have you learned, or have you learned anything about collaborating remotely in one role that's had a particular benefit for the other position?
Well, I guess this is the question of the moment, I suppose, isn't it?
Exactly.
Or it's been the question of the moment through a couple of phases. In the first instance, it's is it making life easier? Can we work remotely effectively, both from a board in a board environment and in an executive operational environment? I think everybody has learned a lot. I think I would say, to start with, to some degree, working remotely has been perhaps easier than expected. It's made transactional interaction efficient and possible and continuous, and therefore decision-making, things are moving along, still at pace. So there's been some real positives about that, and flexibility for some, clearly, in both businesses we're talking about here. Being able to look after people that needed to be properly looked after, and given their own situations, incredibly important. But at the same time, it's made it obvious how important face-to-face interaction is to us. I think from a board perspective, I think you miss the environment that happens around a board meeting and committee. So the formality of the boards and committees all perfectly possible in this environment, but your ability to really discuss, move into detail, bounce around ideas, not dissimilar from an executive environment. It's just trickier, and the relationships that you have around that board are definitely, I feel, more productive when we can be face to face enough, let's say. So I think in both businesses, both boards quite keen to make sure we're getting back together as soon as is possible. But I think we've learned a lot. We've learned new tools, new ways of doing things, and I'm sure it'll be a blend of both going forward.
Excellent, thank you. And what are the benefits and the challenges of having a non-exec directorship in a different industry to your executive, your day job?
So I think the different industry aspect but just to start with, it's an interesting one. It's great experience to be able to move from your sort of current environment and put yourself into the different business, different markets, and industrial environment. So you learn an awful lot from that. I think it definitely prompts you to think about supply chains, value chains, and customer interaction in a different way. Sometimes, I definitely get a lot more sort of the user-consumer interaction, a lot more, from Vitec, very digital, new tech with the user of that equipment, and those are great things that spark off ideas for innovation that you can bring into the thinking of your own business. I think obviously you've got to be mindful of the fact you are in a different business environment too. So you have to, I think, make sure you are appropriately listening, learning. You put the effort in to ensure you understand that business properly, so that you can, make your point, be clear, have your opinion, and share it. But obviously, like any good non-exec should, make your opinion known and share it, and let the executive work out using that as a data point for what they think the right action is.
And as we move on to the next question, diversity inclusion is a must-have in any business agenda.
Sure.
What are the differences of how D&I is tackled in your experience as a CEO compared to that of your external board role?
Well, I think, as you say, Alex, diversity inclusion is fundamental to the future of business. It's critical that everyone gets a proper handle on how to drive the right framework and strategy through their business to get the right benefits. I think from an executive perspective at TT, we have a D&I strategy and a framework that we're applying across the group. I believe, and everybody is working really hard at it. We believe strongly in driving it forward, but equally we know we've got a long way to go, and I'm sure that's true of a lot of businesses. But it means it needs to be, up the agenda and a priority. And I guess that's probably the way I'd link it back to the board environment. Part of the board discussion is about judging strategy, working out the priorities, and making sure those priorities have the focus. So I think that's the way in which you sort of bring that back into the boardroom, or from a non-exec perspective, debate that strategy with your colleagues. Excellent,
thank you. Well, look, Richard, we're grateful for your time today. Thank you, and for the insights shared and provided. Thank you.
Not at all. Good to see you again.
And you. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.